Many financial literacy lessons don't fail because students learn too little. They fail because the learning never reached the behaviour level. A student can sound financially informed, but still be untrained in financial restraint. Real-life money decisions rarely arrive as very neat theoretical questions. They arrive with convenience, emotion, social influence, speed, limited resources, attractive alternatives, and trade-offs. Welcome to Leaven Academy. We're here to help you achieve your goals with expert guidance and support. Many financial literacy lessons don't fail because students learn too little. They fail because the learning never reached the behavior level. Students can often explain the right money principle in the classroom. They can tell you about saving, they can talk about spending priorities, they can explain needs versus wants. But once real choice, limited resources, temptations or trade-off enter, the decision can look really different. And I think that matters more than many schools realize. Because if financial literacy is meant to prepare students for life, then the question cannot be, did they understand the lesson? The deeper question is, did the lesson actually train how they decide? That to me is where a lot of financial literacy delivery begins to struggle. In workshops, I have seen students give the correct financial literacy answer during the discussions. They sound very informed, they sound really clear, they sound like they do understand the concept. And then the moment the activity becomes a real choice with very limited resources, some of them make rather different decisions from what was just said. Now, I don't say that to criticize the students unfairly. I say that not to suggest that students or schools don't care. Most schools are trying something very meaningful in this area, but I do think there is a recurring delivery problem. A lot of financial literacy is still being measured through what students can explain, recall, or complete on paper, and those things matter. Understanding matters, language matters, and concepts do matter. But those things don't necessarily reveal how students will behave. Real choice, pressure, temptations, or trade-offs happen. So the issue is not often that students learn nothing. It is the learning has not yet formed the behavior. And once we see that clearly, the whole conversation becomes very different. Because now we are no longer asking only that the student understand the concept. We are also asking, will this student choose wisely when something is at stake? The simplest way I can explain this is through one distinction. Knowledge versus behavior formation. Knowledge asks, do the students know what is the wise choice to make? Behavior formation asks, will students choose what is wise when pressure enters? It is not the same question. And I think schools need to separate the two much more clearly, because the student may know the principle, but once the principle starts costing them something, the behavior becomes very visible. In my experience, the gap usually shows up in three places: choice, pressure, and trade-off. Now, what do those things mean? Choice means there are actual options placed in front of the child. Pressure means there is something affecting the decision. Speed, emotion, convenience, peer pressure, or even the desire to get what feels good immediately. And trade-off means resources are limited, so they must give up one over another. That is where financial behavior becomes way more honest. Not when the answer is clean, not when the worksheet is done, not when the principle is easy to repeat, but when the student has to decide under some kind of friction. And that is why a lesson can be clear, very well run, and conceptually correct. Yet it doesn't produce much behavioral changes. Here is one simple question I think schools can start using immediately. What decision did this lesson require students to make? That question sounds really simple, but it's actually very revealing. Because if the lesson only required explanation, then great, congrats, we have taught knowledge, but we didn't really train stewardship. A student can correctly sort needs and wants on paper. Well done. A student can tell you that saving is important. Great. A student can say that why spending does matter. But if this lesson never required them to prioritize under constraint or weigh one option over another, then the cost of a trade-off, then the formation side may still be very, very weak. So sometimes A well-designed decision point reveals more than one polished worksheet. And I think that matters especially for educators, for school leaders who want financial literacy to contribute to life readiness, not just topic coverage. The first big issue is this: a student can sound financially informed, but still be untrained in financial restraint. That is not mainly hypocrisy. Often it is maturity that hasn't been formed yet. Two students can sound equally informed during class discussion. Both may appear to understand the concept. Both could actually give the correct answer. But when they are placed to face a actual money-related decision, one pauses, weigh consequences, think ahead, while the other reacts quickly, chooses impulsively. The gap is not mainly knowledge, it is actually maturity. And I think this is where many schools unintentionally overestimate outcomes. Because once a student can explain the concept, it becomes tempting to assume the lesson has landed more deeply. But explanation isn't the same as action. Understanding is important, it is necessary, but it's not the same as disciplined action. So if a school wants a clearer picture of whether formation is happening, it cannot stop at verbal understanding checks or examinations. It needs at least one constrained choice task, something that requires the student to act on the principle they just explained, because financial literacy that stops at explanation hasn't reached stewardship yet. The second issue is this: behavior is usually revealed when a pressure enters that whole situation. Real life money decisions rarely arrive as very neat theoretical questions. They arrive with convenience, emotion, social influence, speed, limited resources, attractive alternatives, trade offs. That is why understanding alone can overstate the readiness. They may appear ready on paper, but in real life, who knows? In workshops, I've seen students answer correctly during discussion, then behave very, very differently when it gets real. And that doesn't mean the lesson failed completely. It just means that the activity revealed something important. It revealed that understanding may have started, but behavior hasn't actually caught up yet. And that is a very useful discovery, because pressure doesn't ruin the lesson. Pressure reveals what the lesson actually formed. Now, of course, schools cannot recreate every single real life situation, and that is a fact. I've been there, I've done that. But schools can create better approximations than explanation only tasks. They can introduce limited resources. I have done that in my PE lessons before when I was a PE teacher. They can introduce competing options. They can introduce time pressure. They can let students feel discomfort of not being able to choose every single thing. Then this part is the most important. Teachers can debrief that decision properly. Why do you choose that? What were you reacting to? What did you overlook? What mattered to you in that moment? What would you do differently next time? That kind of reflection begins to connect the principles with the behavior together. And once that happens, financial literacy starts becoming more than information exposure. There is another pattern also worth noticing. Even at home, many parents discover that a child or teenager can repeat the right money principle long before they are actually ready to live it consistently. So this is not only a school issue, it is also a formation issue. But for schools, the design questions become very, very important. If students never face trade-offs when they are having the lessons, where are they supposed to learn restraint? If they never have to choose under pressure, where are they supposed to practice discernment? If they're only rewarded for saying the right thing, why would we assume that they are ready to do the right thing in action? The third issue is this: formation requires repeated decision practice. And if we want the student behavior to change, we cannot treat one correct answer as congratulations. It is proof of their maturity. Behavior forms through repeated decisions. They reflect and the consequences of that decision. It is not done through explanation alone. Information can be delivered quite quickly. Formation, unfortunately, usually can't. And I think schools need to be realistic about that. A one off financial literacy session, although it's good in itself, may expose students to useful ideas which are valuable. But if the goal is behavioral maturity, then students need repeated reps, just like training a muscle. They need to learn the principle, then face a decision, reflect on what happened, and then do it differently again. That cycle matters. We teach, we allow them to choose, there is reflection, and adjustments are made accordingly. And then the whole cycle goes through again: teaching, choosing, reflecting, and adjustments. That is much closer to how stewardship develops. Because stewardship is not mainly built by hearing what is wise, it is built by repeatedly practicing wise decisions with increasing awareness. So, if schools design financial literacy mainly for coverage, they may achieve exposure. That's sufficient alone. But if they want stronger behavioral outcomes, they need to design more intentionally for formation. And yes, it is a lot slower, but formation is slower than exposure. So by now, I think the issue is clearer. The problem is not often that students learn nothing. It is that learning has not yet formed the behavior, and that changes how schools should evaluate success. Because the real question is not only, can the students explain the concept? Most students can. It is also, can students act on the concept when something is at stake? It is the application of that concept. That is a much more demanding question, but it is also a much more useful one. So, if a school wants financial literacy to shape student behavior and not just student understanding, here are three practical shifts. First, it's hard. We have to audit lessons by decision exposure. Ask of every single lesson that is being planned for, what decision did students actually have to make? Because if no real decision was required, because everything was decided for them, then the lesson may have stayed mainly at the expectation level. Second, build pressure and trade-off into the activity design. Use limited resources, use competing options, use time limits, use visible consequences. And I've seen many teachers do that. Let students feel that choosing one thing means not choosing another, because behavior becomes more visible when something is at stake. Third, debrief behavior, not just the answer. Don't ask whether the student got it right. Ask why did they choose what they chose. Ask what influenced them to make that decision. Ask what they noticed about themselves. Ask what they will do differently the next time. Because reflection is what helps students connect the principle to the pattern in their behavior. And that is where formation starts becoming more real. So if I had to summarize the whole issue in one line, it would be this: train for behavior, not just understanding. Because the goal is not just students who know about money, the goal is students who can steward money. If your school is thinking or considering very seriously about financial literacy outcomes, I've put together a financial maturity package that can help you think more clearly about what this formation should actually look like. You can find that in the link below. I just need your email address so I can send it over to you. If your school is reviewing not just what is being taught, but what is actually being formed in students, that is exactly the kind of conversation Leaven Academy is built to support. Because financial education should not only produce students who know about money with their heads, it should also produce students who can steward money. And I think that is where stronger financial literacy begins. So that's the end of today. I hope you've learned a lot with me. And if you like this kind of content, I'll see you in the next one. Take care.